So, Enrique, welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself to listeners?
Thank you for the invite, Eva. My name is Enrique Rubio, and I am the founder of Hacking HR.
Brilliant. And would you like to tell us a little bit about your background? And, you've been working in HR for quite a long time. And where, I suppose, where did the interest come from deciding to set up Hacking HR?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my career started in engineering, actually. I am an electronic engineer, and I started working in just technology. And during my career as an engineer, I at some point I worked in sales, and I found out that I really, really liked working with people, but I didn't want to be in sales, even though everything in life is actually sales, to be honest. But I didn't want to be like in the profession of being a salesperson. So I thought to myself, what is the next thing or the other thing where I can work with and for people that is not sales? And then I discovered human resources. And then I moved out from the engineering field, got my master's degree with a focus on HR, created a consulting company, then worked for some organizations in the HR field. And here I am. So I have been in HR for about 10 years now. But before that, I had my career in engineering. And the coolest thing to me is this ability to bring two backgrounds that are so seemingly disconnected, right? Engineering and HR, you're like, man, that does not connect anywhere in any form possible. But in reality, the way I see things in the world is that the more disconnected the things you learn are, the more and the better ability you will have to create better things, to be more innovative, to be more creative, more curious, because your horizon has expanded so much, way beyond somebody who has been in the same field for a long time. So anyway, it's a long answer to say that that's how I got into HR, but my background is engineering. And I love thinking with both brains, if you will, because they require different skills, different capabilities, different ways to think about life and work in general. Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant the way you kind of came at it from two different perspectives, I suppose. And in relation to Hacking HR, so that's kind of how I first encountered you, Enrique. Hacking HR, like what prompted that? Where did that come from?
Well, Hacking HR comes from, people ask me this question very often, and I go back and I find several triggers for Hacking HR. Trigger number one is I am passionate about HR, but because of my background in engineering, I noticed a big disconnect between technology and HR, even though one should be feeding the other, and not just one overwhelming the other, if you will. It's not just technology over HR or HR over technology. It's a relationship in there where a partnership of both fields. And I saw a big disconnect between the two. And because my background is technology engineering, electronic engineering, I wanted to do something to connect these two worlds, to connect the world of technology and to connect the world of HR with technology. So that is one driver, one trigger that made me incentivized me to create Hacking HR. Then the other thing is I went through a couple of nasty experiences with HR, and I said to myself, and even though I was working in HR, but then I said to myself, I am an outspoken person. I stand up for myself. I don't hold things back. I speak up when I see things that are not working well. If this is happening to me, these nasty experiences are happening to me, being the way I am, how, imagine what would happen to people that are less inclined to speak up when something is happening to them or to others. And then I realized, HR could be a great function. We have the potential of being something amazing, but we are doing a lot of wrong things. I mean, and again, I gotta say, I love HR because when I say this, people think like, oh, you don't like HR. No, on the contrary, I love HR. And that's why I'm doing Hacking HR. It's just that I realize that the work we're doing is not enough, that the work we're doing has been, more geared towards processes, systems, policies, compliance, rather than the human that is making the magic happen in the workplace. So, the trigger of the connectivity between technology and HR, and the trigger of what happened to me and how HR reacted and operated with what happened to me in those workplaces were the two of the main drivers. And the last one perhaps is that in my last work experience, I think that, I'm going to be talking about being happy at work today, but one thing that happened to me that happens to, I think, everybody, I'm going to say, I don't want to generalize, but maybe 99.9% of everybody in the world who works, they go to work and they find themselves in a place where only a small percentage of the real creative capacities are being utilized for that workplace, because they are hired to do something that these people can learn to do very quickly. And maybe they take a little bit of extra time in learning how to do something. But once you master that skill, workplaces are so rigid that it's difficult for the workplace to give these people opportunities to unleash their creative potential, their creative power into areas that go beyond the work for which they were hired. So that was happening to me in my last job. I was in a place where I feel that maybe 5% or 10%, if at all, of my creative capacities were being utilized. And I had all this, all this creativity, all this curiosity, all these ideas, all this imagination. And it didn't really matter how many times I tried to propose to do something different in my workplace. It was, it was stiff, things didn't move they moved pretty slowly. And I said, you know what, I need to utilize this 90% of creative capacities better, because I don't want to just be sitting in an office for 7 hours out of the 10 hours that I spend in the office just looking at Facebook. I want to do something useful and valuable with my time. And that's hacking HR. So it's the combination of technology and HR is these experiences with HR that were not that positive, and a little bit of the using my creative capacities in a useful way for myself and for others, of course. So those three factors were the drivers for me to create Hacking HR.
It's really interesting, Enrique, that you say about this the creativity, and that let's say the majority of workplaces don't allow for that. I read something on Twitter just this morning that was in relation to that, and it asked a question in such a way that made you think, because often people might not think that they're very creative, or they associate creativity with being artistic and that kind of thing. But I get the impression what you're talking about is more about being curious and coming up with new solutions and being able to do things differently and challenge the status quo and all of those great things that we should be doing at work. But like you say, there's not really that opportunity, because actually it takes you maybe a few months to get up to speed on how to use the systems in that new workplace. And then it's very much, you just kind of follow the rules as to how everything has always been done.
Yeah, there's one of the most famous TED Talks ever is by Sir Ken Robinson. And he talks about creativity in education. He says the following. He says, we are born being creative and curious and with the capacity to use our imagination. But creativity is educated out of us in the school system. We are taught to follow the rules. We are taught to be obedient. We are taught to listen to somebody who seemingly knows more than us because, well, that person memorized more facts than we did. And we're taught to repeat the facts that such a person is spreading out. And because creativity and imagination and curiosity are educated out of us, we drag the same principle to the workplace. The same thing happens in the workplace. Creativity, curiosity, imagination are processed, are standardized, are HR'd out of us in the workplace, because we're hired to do one thing and to do it well day in and day out. We're not hired generally, more generally than not, we're not hired to come to work and say, I'm going to do this thing, but it doesn't work well if we continue doing it in that way. What if we do it in this other way? What if we do it in that other way? What might happen if we do this thing, or what might happen if we do that other thing? Why not do this, or why not do that? We are not trained to do that. And if we do it, which is what happened to me in my workplace, you become the insurgent. You become the revolutionary guy who the organization doesn't want to have around, because you don't follow the authority, you don't follow the process, you don't follow the rule, and you're not compliant. You are, as I said before, the insurgent, rising up against the elected officials in the workplace.
Yeah.
And that is the problem, because at the end of the day, you end up utilizing way less of what your true capacities are. And I think, and I believe that we need to create a completely different structure, a completely different system, where people are not just hired to do something and that's the one thing that they have to do when they come to work, but where people have a minimum of expectations from them to do at work, and then they are given the freedom to create more, to be more, to add more value, to be curious, to challenge the status quo if that was needed in order to create new things. If we're able to do that, I think we're going to be in a great place. You have the example of Google, for example, that I think it's something that you know, by design, they allow people to say, utilize 20% of your time for something that is not necessarily directly related to your job. And some of the most amazing innovations from Google came out of that 20%.
Yeah.
I don't believe in quotas, by the way. You know, in general, I don't believe in quotas. I don't believe in telling people, okay, one day out of the 5 days of the week, you are going to be doing whatever you want that can create value to you and to the organization. To me, that happens naturally.
Yeah.
Imagine if I am doing something that is for my job and I am in the zone, in flow, what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. If I am in flow doing something, I don't need somebody to tell me, utilize 20% of the time that you're dedicating to that to be doing something else. I'm in flow. I'm doing what I have to do. But some other times, maybe 4 days out of 1 week, I am so inspired by something else that I don't pay that much attention to what I have to do day in and day out, because I'm creating something else. So let's, you know, not quotas, but instead of quotas, maybe we should be focusing on really giving people the platform to be creative, curious, innovative, to give them that freedom to know the work that they have to do, but also to know that they have a wide, you know, sort of blank canvas, if you will, to paint things that nobody has ever seen before in that organization. That, to me, is the real concept of engagement, employee experience, and happiness at work, and meaning, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can understand totally where you're coming from, but I can also see some of the challenges that that presents for organizations. Or I suppose what I'm trying to get to is, like, what is the first step that an organization who's not currently doing this, how can they kind of turn things around for themselves and start doing more of that and creating more of a creative workplace?
That is a fantastic question. And because I do understand, you know, companies are like, all right, well, you know, we can be the hippie place that everybody comes and, you know, is smoking weed and having fun. And, but, you know, we need to make the money, because if we don't make the money, you know, we can't keep you as an employee and we won't be sustainable in time. I do understand that. To me, you know, there are many places where we can, you know, trace back the beginning of what I'm saying. One of them is trust. If we don't trust the people that we're hiring, there might be two things happening in there. One is that we're hiring the wrong people. So if you have to tell your people what to do, if you have to be micromanaging them, if that's the only way in which they operate, they are not the right people for your organization. Maybe they are not the right person for that one job in which you have placed them. Maybe they are great for something else. But people generally, when they are inspired, when they are in flow, when they are fully engaged into the craft that they have to do with their hands, they don't need anybody to tell them how to do it or what to do. They are inspired to do it. I mean, you're here. I don't think if anybody's telling you with a gun in your head, you got to do this podcast. You're doing it because you love it.
Yeah, exactly.
You like doing it. No, so, you know, I have to trust that you are going to make it happen because this is something that you're passionate about. Same thing in the workplace. If I have to tell you, if you do the podcast, if blah, 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 this or that, then you may not be the right person to do the podcast. Maybe I need to look for somebody else. Maybe you're not the right person to be in the organization. And that is okay. So that is approach number one, that maybe you don't have the right people for the specific job or for your organization. Now, I'm talking about trust. Second thing in terms of trust is that if you have the right person for a job or for your organization, and you continue to tell them what to do, then you don't trust them. And you are making a gigantic disservice for yourself as an organization, as a leader, and for those people that you're telling what to do. Steve Jobs said something like, what is the meaning of hiring great talent if you're going to end up telling them what to do? It's going to
Yeah.
be the other way around.
Mm.
You hire great talent, and they come. I don't think there's anybody who gets to a job coming bored, or annoyed already. Everybody, this has been my experience. This is very empirical, by the way, but I don't know of anybody who comes to the first day of their work and they are already annoyed at the
Mm.
organization. They are
Yeah.
inspired.
Yeah.
But that inspiration, I'm gonna paraphrase Sir Ken Robinson, that inspiration is taken out of people in the workplace. So if we learn to trust that when you hire great talent, they will do what they have to do, but you have to give them the freedom, you have to give them the resources, you have to give them the tools, the time to utilize the rest of their time in a creative way for themselves and for the organization, then I think we're going to be in a great place. You got to trust that they are going to do what they are meant to do. Now, if they don't do it, you of course make decisions, but you cannot begin from a place of, I don't trust Aoife that she's going to do a good podcast, so I'm going to tell her what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to make it happen, and then I'm going to find out, you know what? I hired Aoife to do the podcast, and she's doing it very well. And I noticed that she also likes to do, I don't know, online training. Maybe I say, hey, Aoife, you know what? I noticed that you like to do online training. We didn't hire you for that, but we want to create a couple of online trainings in this organization. Would you help us doing that? Because I know from what I've seen, I know that you're doing your job well, but that you're also passionate about this thing, and we need you to help us out with that one thing.
Mm.
Do you see the connection here?
Yeah.
It is trust, but it is also unleashing that creative potential that people have that can be of power for themselves and for others. And let me add just one more thing. I believe that in this day and age, people from all generations are inspired to learn beyond their workplaces. I don't find too many people who say, I am not going to learn because my workplace is not paying for me to learn. I think, or it's not paying for my training. I find people, I see people finding ways to train and to learn and to reskill and upskill themselves in very different ways by reading books, by watching YouTube videos, by reading news and whatnot. So this is the thing. If I know Aoife is great in doing podcasting, and I have observed that you dedicate a lot of your time to learn how to do online training, and I'm not even paying for that, isn't it stupid from my end as an organization not to ask you to help me to do something that you already know how to do, that is a skill that you have that it didn't pay for you to get? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like how idiotic, how stupid it is to not utilize the skills and capabilities that somebody already has, that person invested in themselves, or in him or herself, on their own. It's stupid to me that we don't take advantage of that, right? And we don't. That's what happens in the workplace. We don't. So anyway, to me, the one of the main factors that could drive this kind of new thinking is trust your people. And if you don't trust them, it's either because you're making a mistake or because you didn't hire right.
Mm. Or, well, I mean, I have so much to say about everything you've said there. It was interesting you were saying about say if I'm the right person versus the wrong person to do the podcast, in this kind of scenario that we were talking about. And if I'm procrastinating and kind of leaving it till the last minute, maybe I'm not the right person to do that because it's not something I enjoy and I'm just putting it kind of further and further away. So that was something that struck me. Then this whole idea of not trusting in relation to telling people what they have to do, rather than seeking out, okay, so we hired you because you're so good. Now, why don't you show us how good you are and bring us the ideas? And, that's why we hired you. Going back to what Steve Jobs said there. And then this whole idea of companies not taking full advantage of the skills that people have. And I think it's so prevalent at the moment, and I have definitely experienced it firsthand. I've lived and I've worked all over. I don't want to say all over the world, but I've worked and lived in lots and lots of different countries, and I have often felt that the skills that I have were not necessarily tapped into by the organization, or they weren't necessary, or they weren't made aware of it, or I always kind of felt a little bit like that. What can we do about that? Is that does that boil down to the individual manager. And then, you know, when you're talking about managers, is that a case of, if someone is micromanaging, is that because they haven't learned how to be a proper manager? Is that because they shouldn't really be a manager at all?
That's a
You
good
know,
question.
lots and lots to get into there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in there, and I was just looking it up. I just didn't remember what was the right quote, but there's a quote that is attributed to Albert Einstein, and it says something like, you know, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish for its
Yeah.
ability to climb a tree,
Yeah.
then the fish is going to live its whole life thinking that, you know, he's stupid.
Yeah.
And, you know, going back to what you said about the podcast, it goes, you know, along the same ways, right? There are people that are well suited to, you know, to doing some kind of things and not for others. And it's not because they are incapable of doing those other things. It may be just because they don't find passion in doing those things.
Yeah.
And to me, it's hiring the right people means also hiring the people that are passionate about the work that they will need to be doing. That to me is powerful. And you don't see that in a resume. Hardly ever you can find that in an interview. You got to see what people do and how they operate. I think the fact that, you know, if you're passionate about doing podcasts, but you dislike doing online training, for example, and I put you to do online training, I mean, maybe that's your job and you're going to do it because they pay you to do that. But I don't think your creative juices are going to be flowing like lava out of a volcano, you know, when you're doing that, because it's not your thing. And so there's a little bit of a combination in there of who's the culprit of why those kind of things happen. One is, of course, the leadership. And I say leadership not because not because their inability to find out what's happening, but because their inability to create a space where people can actually say, you know what, Enrique, I love doing the podcast, but I really suck at the online training that you are asking me to do. And I suck at it because I don't like it. Ask me to do something else. Like these are the things, this is the portfolio of things that I am great at. You're asking me to do something that I can do, and I'm going to do it well because you're paying me to do it, but that's not where my passions are. That's not where my creative juices can flow. So ask me to do it, I'm going to do it. But if you instead, put me to do some other things, I'm going to be way better and I'm going to deliver much more value in there. So it's a leadership problem because of one, their inability to understand people in that way, but also their inability to create the environment where people can vulnerably and openly come forward and say those kind of things. Now, you also talked a little bit about the example of people of micromanagers in the workplace. This is a big one for me because, I've had several micromanagers along my career, and I think there are several things that explain why they behave that way. One of them, perhaps the easiest, thing to point at is they lack the skills to be good leaders, right? But I have found that very often some of these micromanagers, they have gone through training, they have gone through reskilling programs, they have gone through a lot of education to help them become better leaders instead than micromanagers. And they continue to behave in the same way. So to me, yes, they may not have the tools to become great leaders, but there's something else in there. And that something else is a more human factor. It's lack of trust in their people.
Yeah.
It's insecurity about not only the deliverables of their team, but their own stance or the way they are seen or perceived by the organization. Maybe they are insecure about, what happens if somebody else is shining in the team rather than themselves. I had a leader like that. We would create something and she would say, thank you for that. I am going to go to the meeting with the big boss and present this thing. This is very anecdotal, by the way, but it happens to a lot of people that, the credit gets stolen from them by the micromanager, and that micromanager is presenting that whatever, thing to, higher leadership if it was something that person was leading or doing by him or herself. And I think there's a lot of insecurity in there, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think this requires a lot of coaching. It doesn't require traditional learning. It's not just enough to put these people through a learning program or through, whether online or in person or whatever. I think they need a lot of coaching. They need to be way more aware. And the reality is the following. Netflix has this culture where they have high performing teams. If they bring somebody and that somebody is not performing at the level that the team and the organization needs the person to be performing, they in a very polite way, they address the challenge. But if the challenge continues, they let that person go. And this is why. If you have a team of high performers and you bring an average or low performer in that one role or that one team, and you don't do anything about it, which happens very often in many organizations, if you don't do anything about it, what's going to happen is that the entire performance of the team will start decreasing, because everybody else will say, you know what? I mean, if I put together 20 podcasts a day, Enrique puts together one, why am I going to, work my ass off doing 20 podcasts a day if Enrique is still here just doing one? You know what? Next week I'm going to do just 10. So your performance starts to go down and down. So those problems need to be addressed. So in leadership, it's the same thing. If you're coaching somebody, if you are providing them with the tools to become more aware about the shortcomings as a leader, and the problem continues, and the team is decreasing their performance, the outcome is not as, the quality is not as valuable as you want it to be, and you have addressed this problem, you have to let the leader go. And this is a hard choice, but for you, it is whether you want to sacrifice the performance of an entire team and the outcome of an organization versus the one person that may be bringing the entire house down. So that to me is a little bit of what's happening with leaders. I think it's critical that we have great leaders at work. And let me just add one last thing in this regards. Jim Collins, in the book From Good to Great, he said the following. He said, great people are motivated and inspired. Your role as a leader is not to motivate them or to inspire them. Your role is to not demotivate them or uninspire them, and that's exactly what happens very often in the workplace when you have a micromanager. If today's my day one, I am all enthusiastic about starting my work in the organization where I'm going to be working. And then I get there and I have somebody telling me all the time, every day, what to do, how to do it, when to do it. The enthusiasm and the inspiration that I had is being killed right away by that approach to leadership. So their role is to make sure that I have the tools to operate, that the obstacles are being removed, that I'm being coached, that I'm being mentored, that I'm being acknowledged for my contribution, that I'm being helped when I need help. That to me is the role of a leadership. And there's one very interesting research done in the 1950s by I think his name he was a teacher, Sanford Neville, if I remember correctly. I don't know if you know, he talks about 4 quadrants in which people operate, and the 2 axes of the quadrants are support and challenge. And basically what Neville Sanford said, if that's his name, I can't remember totally if that's his name. He says that leaders have to provide the right balance of challenge and support. And what that means is that if they provide more support than challenge, you may be getting bored. And you're getting bored because you are not finding the challenge of doing something, if you will. You're not finding the spark into learning something new if you're getting all that extra support that you don't need. Now, if you're being challenged way beyond your capabilities, you're going to get frustrated because you're going to go to a point where you don't really know how to do something, but you're being pushed to do it. So what leaders do is to provide the right level of support so that you have somebody in there who is with you when you need that person, but also the right level of challenge so that you're constantly improving in your craft, if you will.
Yeah.
So all of these things I think are important. That was a long answer to your question, by the way.
But brilliant. I mean,
10-minute answer to your question.
It was more of a kind of dialogue, I suppose, about what I said, and something that's really struck me in everything that you've said, Enrique, is this concept of trust. So you were talking about it's up to leaders to create that space where people feel safe to come forward and say, actually, do you know what, I'm not really utilizing my skills, or I'm not really enjoying this aspect of the role. Is there something that we can do here? and I'm sure you'll know as well, from your research and things like that, it's this concept of psychological safety would be the kind
Yeah.
of the academic term that we use. I love that you said about awareness as well, and for people to be aware. And I suppose, I don't know, how do you how do you enable or facilitate other people to be aware? And maybe the answer is coaching. Maybe it's asking questions, and people kind of um, grasp the concepts themselves, or grasp what it is that they're actually doing if they've been micromanaging. And I love this idea of the support and balance, the support and challenge, and kind of
Yeah.
finding the balance between those two things. I think that's really, really important. I'll look that up, and I can add in the reference. If it's not Neville Sanford's, I'll find it anyway, and I can put in a reference to it into the show notes anyway. But just conscious, something that we haven't spoken about yet is the future of work, and what that actually means in the current climate, in the situations that we find ourselves in, or the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment, being COVID-19, global pandemic, most people working from home, some people in Ireland starting to trickle back into the office in kind of a safe environments and socially distanced and all of that kind of stuff. It's starting to kind of open things up a little bit more in Ireland. But I do know of a lot of offices that won't be going back till September, and others that won't be going back till January next year at the very earliest. So it's had a huge impact on the economies globally, on businesses, on how we work. And I'd love to get your perspective on what you think this presents in terms of challenges and opportunities for organizations to create better workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing that I want to say is that the name of the guy is Neville Sanford, not Neville.
Okay. Never.
I had to look it up. I just couldn't go on my, through my day without looking it up.
Never.
talking about being driven to, find some answers, right?
Oh yeah. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, it's like, I have it right in here, and I gotta find it. I can't live with myself if I don't find it. All right, so Neville Sanford, for your listeners who may be interested in looking at the theory of support and challenge, and very related to the idea of flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is, he wrote this book called Flow and Creativity. This guy is, he's just in another category of humans, if you will. He's so advanced in his thinking. But, going back to your idea of all the things that are going on right now, I think there has never been a greater opportunity for us to do things differently and to evolve and to transform the way we work and live, if you will. And I do want to acknowledge that what we're going through is a catastrophe. It is a tragedy from all the ends that you try to look at it. It's a tragedy. It's a catastrophe. It's painful for a lot of people. People are suffering because they themselves are sick, or because they have lost loved ones, or they are financially struggling. So if I was to design how I would want the changes in the workplace and life to happen, I would have never designed something where people were going to suffer for us to be able to change. And I got to say that because I don't want to be oblivious to the fact that there are people out there in a lot of distress, in dire situations, and we have to be, cognizant about that.
Absolutely.
Now, we are in the middle of all this mess, and we're in the middle of all this suffering. So to me, the worst thing that we can do is to let it go in vain, to let it go wasting the opportunities that this crisis is presenting to us. And actually, quoting Albert Einstein again, he said that the best of people, the best progress, the best creativity comes out from times of crisis. And I'm paraphrasing him. And it's true, because now we're forced to think differently about basically everything, about how we relate to other humans, about how we work, about life in general, and whatnot. And I've been saying that in this crisis, we are in a dark tunnel right now. We're moving in a very dark tunnel. It's a very dark page in the history of humanity. And we left a light behind, the light that we left when we entered the tunnel. People always say, I want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I say the same thing, but I also add to that I don't want that light to be the same light that we left behind, because then we will have wasted all the darkness through that tunnel, if you will,
Okay.
which is the pain and suffering that we're going through right now.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I mean by that is that this will become a wasted opportunity if we don't transform the way people work. And let me go back to one example of all the things that are changing, and that's trust. In the United States, 2% of the people were working remote, full-time remote, before the pandemic hit America. Now it is something like about 40%. When you examine the rationale of why people couldn't work from home before, you find the stupidest ideas or the stupidest reasons that you can think of. And because we don't have the tools, or because of that, or because we talk to each other when we're in the office, and that's how we collaborate, blah blah blah. We don't have an alternative right now, and people have to be working from home. To me, it really was always about trust. That I didn't trust my people, that they were going to be working and doing the right thing when they were at home. That was, to me, the big thing. Because right now, in literally, from March 10th or something like that, when the crisis started in America, to the end of March, many companies were already operating from home. So in basically a period of 3 or 4 weeks, they found the tools, they found the ways to talk to each other, they found the way to collaborate, they found all the answers to the questions that they before said that they couldn't be responded. So the reality is that, in my view, it was a matter of trust. One of them, and that to me perhaps is the most powerful one. So we have built a new way of work, and we are letting people work remotely. We're trusting more in them. We know that they are doing the work because our organizations are struggling, but they are surviving. So I think that just like remote work, there are many other things that have changed dramatically over the past few months. The role of leadership. Let's think about the micromanagers for a second. The micromanagers were in the office with you, and they were looking at, let me see if Ifa is in the office, doing the podcast. Oh, it's 10 a.m. and Ifa is not around. Ifa, where are you? I don't see you in the office. It's at 10 a.m. You should be working. Now they don't have that option because they can't really see you all the time. So even the role of leaderships, especially for those who are micromanagers, is changed, because we have noticed that we are still operating, that our organizations are fighting back and are surviving without those micromanagers. So the role of leadership is also changing. So what I'm trying to say here is that we need to look at all the things that have changed in the past 4 or 5 weeks and think which of those things is sustainable in time. What things that we were doing before should never, ever come back to the workplace again. What things that we were doing before were working fine, they needed some tweaking, and now we can, once we get out of this pandemic, we can continue to do going forward. So this right now is the one social global experiment and the one opportunity for us to make global changes to the way we work and the way things happen. Of course, there are many other things that I could be talking about. The fact that now we are unearthing something that we knew it was happening, but inequality, for example, in the access to education, inequality in the access to technology, inequality in the access to healthcare. In America, people are, just to give you one example, 30% of people who are on lease for apartments or houses, they will not be able to pay for rent in July. That is just
Wow.
that is just not fair. Yesterday, I was reading that during the pandemic, almost 6 million people lost their jobs, lost their health insurance, partially because they lost their jobs. That's we have to come to a place where we say, what? This pandemic is a horrifying thing, but if we continue to do the same things that we have done for a long period of time, then we're going to be extending this horrific situation even beyond the pandemic. So we got to do something about this. From the workplace perspective, it is trust. It is finding new ways of work. It is better leveraging on technology. It is putting the human in the center of everything that we do. It is changing the way we think and we operate in when it comes to leadership. Maybe the last thing that I want to say is I am seeing a new social role of the organization, especially private companies, becoming much more attuned to the times that we're living in. In the United States, we're going through right now not only the pandemic but also the virus of racism, and unfortunately, racism has been empowered and fostered by our very government. And what's happening here in the United States right now is that many companies, private companies, are standing up and taking a social stance and saying, I don't agree with that. You have, for example, NASCAR. NASCAR is traditionally white America, more conservative America kind of sport, if you will.
Yeah.
And NASCAR said recently, we're banning all Confederate flags from our sport, from our facilities, from our cars and whatnot. That is a big social stance to the things that are happening today. And I'm happy to see that. And I hope that we can extend that over time. So those are some of the changes that I'm seeing in the workplace and society in general, if you will.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great. Is there anything else that you see as kind of an opportunity in relation to how we could facilitate this change? So one of the really strong themes to come out from the entire conversation is this idea of trust. And I suppose, like, how do we start to trust other people? If you're a manager, how do you start to trust your team more? Or if you are an individual, an employee, how do you elicit that trust in your own manager?
That's a great question. And I think from the leader's perspective, if you are sitting in a leadership position, I mean, there are many ways in which you can do this. I think one of the most powerful ones is presenting yourself as the human that you are. Coming forward and saying, you know what, guys, you are in pain and you are suffering and you are going through all this emotional roller coaster. Me too. And you know what? You have questions about whether you're going to keep your job, what's going to happen with the company, are we going to be around next week? I do have those questions too. And if you want answers from me, the answer to that is I don't have the answers. We got to do this together.
Yeah.
Let's put all this, let's put all the problems that we're dealing with on the table, and let's find together the solutions that we need in order to do things better and to respond to these, complex challenges that we're dealing with. So to me, when you present yourself as the human that you are and not as the machine that you have tried to present yourself, as, for a long period of time, you're going to be creating an environment where other people will be more empowered to come forward and say, I'm thank you for saying that. I'm also scared. I need my job. I'm a single parent. I have, 4 kids at home. I work 3 shifts. And when you say that, I feel empathy. And now I am more, empowered to come forward and talk about my reality and say the things that are happening to me and work for the sustainability of the organization and for me keeping my job, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that to me is powerful, presenting yourself as leader, as a human leader. There's one nice story that somebody told me about her CEO. This person is the CHRO of a company. The CEO, now the company is, everybody's working from home. So the CEO has 3 kids, like a dog and a couple of cats or something like that. So he was doing town hall meetings on Zoom, for the company. And he was connecting from the bathroom because that was the only place where nobody could find him and that he was quiet.
Yeah.
But he was using a virtual background. So nobody really knew that he was in the bathroom, only the CHRO. So the CHRO told the guy, you know what? Don't use the virtual background. Let everybody know that you're connecting from the bathroom. Because when you do that, the other person that is turning off the camera because it's also connected from the bathroom will say, I feel that I can do it because I'm not going to be judged because my situation is not unique to me. It is similar to what others are going through. That is presenting yourself as a human being, vulnerably, with all the things that you're going through. That to me is a great example of presenting yourself as a human being. Connect from the bathroom and just show the shower in the background and let everybody know I'm connecting from here because otherwise my kids will be running around, the dog will be barking, the cat will be jumping on the desk, and we're going to get distracted.
Yeah.
So that to me is a great story on leaders becoming more human and building the infrastructure for trust, if you will.
Yeah. It's probably the only room in the house that has a lock on the door.
Probably, yeah, if at all. I'm sure that the kids are daddy, and fortunately, I think he wasn't interrupted in a while, but I'm glad to hear that he wasn't using the virtual background anymore.
Yeah,
no, he was showing himself as, this is who I am. Mhm.
really relatable as well.
Yeah.
No, but I loved what you said there, Enrique. So really kind of boiling it down, in order to build trust, it's about being human at work, showing your own vulnerabilities, and I suppose sharing those vulnerabilities with other people, and being really transparent about what you know versus what you don't know.
Yeah.
And, yeah, just being human.
Yeah.
It really
It's
comes down to that.
you know what if all that we talked about today, all of it can be summarized in what you just said, is being human.
Yeah.
We're not asking people, we have been asked people to be machines for a long period of time,
Mm.
to become emotionless, empathyless, to become more rigid and hard, with a thicker skin when they look at other people's problems, even when they are going through the same thing. They have to show themselves as, I'm the leader, or I am this, and I cannot, shed a tear, because then people will say that I'm weak. I think that right now it is the time where everybody is allowed to be human. It should have been like this all the time,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to show ourselves as human, and to say, what, I am afraid. I am. I talk about all these things, future of work. I'm optimistic. I think we're gonna see a lot of suffering in the world in the next few months. I think,
Mm.
I think we have not seen yet the worst of this tragedy,
Yeah, I
because you
agree.
think about a country like the United States, and still things are operating. We haven't really seen the economic uh, total fallout
Yeah.
of this crisis, and when it
Same
happens,
here.
it's
Yeah.
gonna, the entire global economy will be brought down again, like in
Mhm.
2008. The only difference, of course, now is that, unfortunately, we have a virus that creates a different set of circumstances, as opposed to what happened in 2008, where people were just like selling coffee out on the streets. Now they cannot do that. So that scares me, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think being human and being open and vulnerable about these conversations help us vent with each other, create more rapport with each other's feelings,
Mm.
and together say, what, we're dealing with the same freaking thing. Let's try to find solutions together.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
hoping that in the long term, we export, like we do, with a file, that we export the resilience and the capabilities that we have learned from this crisis to the other simultaneous crises that we're dealing with in the world: inequality, climate change, political and social unrest in many countries in the world. I'm hoping that all that we're learning through this crisis is exported and utilized to resolve some of those other crises, if you will.
Great. So the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, Enrique, what makes you happier at work?
That I can be myself, when I can be myself.
Brilliant. I
When I
love
can be
it.
myself, yeah. if
I
i
love
if I'm
that.
able to be myself, in a sense where, with my vulnerabilities, with my strength, with my gaps, with the things that I'm not good at, and with the things that I want to do but I'm not given an opportunity to do. I think that, to me, is what makes me happier. I prefer somebody telling me, "Hey, Enrique, I know you love doing podcasts, but we cannot do the podcast in this organization yet, because we are working in this secret project. And once we get it done, maybe, in a year from now, you can do the podcast." I prefer somebody being transparent with me, rather than ignoring the fact that people want to do things and they are not allowed to do
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So I like transparency, even when the transparency is bringing inside hard and tough
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
prefer that than hiding, behind a desk or under a desk, and not telling people things they should know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if people want to find out more about you or hacking HR, would you like to share some information about how they can find out, or about the events that you run, anything like that?
Sure. All on the website, hackinghr.io. They can look me up on LinkedIn, Enrique Rubio. And, I'm super active on LinkedIn all the time. So they can find me in there and follow me, and look at the things that we are working on.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much for your time today. Really, really enjoyed our conversation. Could have gone on. Could have gone on
Well, thank
for
you.
much longer, but really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great.
No,
So I'll end the podcast there, and brilliant. No, really, really enjoyed that conversation. Really, really good. I'm hoping, depending on how my dissertation goes, I'm hoping to get the podcast out for Friday.
right.
Yeah, I'm hoping to finish the dissertation tomorrow evening, and then submit it.
Well, good luck with
Yeah,
that.
fingers crossed.
Lot of hours of work in there, but I'm sure you're gonna get it done.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
good luck with that. Can
But
I ask you a favor?
yeah, of course.
Do you mind sending me the unedited version of the of this video recording? If you, I don't know if you use WeTransfer. If you want to
Yeah.
send it via WeTransfer, I want to use a couple of spots from the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Show
Now,
a couple of things.
I think I had a problem with disk space, so the video stopped recording like a minute or two before we ended. But I can, yeah, absolutely send that across to you,
Yeah,
as soon as I get it, and then
Yeah,
I'll.
I don't mind the last minute. That the rest. So if you can.
Yeah, there were some really great one-liners that you can use in video. Absolutely.
Yeah, I create a lot of videos myself, but when I'm in an interview, I do this often. I think I'm more in the flow, in the
Oh
zone,
yeah, yeah,
than when I'm by myself.
yeah.
So
I
try to use
totally
some,
relate to that.
yeah,
Yeah,
some snippets of that
Yeah.
to put out. So
Yeah.
if you can send that to me via WeTransfer,
no
that would be
problem.
amazing. And I'll post it.
Yeah, no, I love editing videos. Like, talk about flow when I was looking at the results from my dissertation, or when I'm doing editing on the podcast and all that kind of stuff. We really get into the flow. But I have yet to do like a solo podcast, a solo cast, because for exactly that reason. Like, it's much easier, I think, to have a conversation with someone else, and you get prompted to you think about things when you're in a conversation, rather than you have notes and you're like, okay, now I want to talk about this, okay, and then into the microphone for a few minutes at a time. I think it's much easier to have a conversation.
Much easier, yeah. It flows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's
All right.
it.
Well, I look
Brilliant.
forward to the recording, and thank you so much. I wish you the best with the dissertation.
Thank you.
And I'm sure it's going to be a very busy couple of days for you,
Yeah.
but I'm sure it's going to go great.
Thanks. The other thing I meant to say, if you haven't, I don't think you've sent me through a headshot and a bio. If you could send through a headshot and bio for social
All right.
media and stuff like that, that would be great.
I'll do that. Perfect.
Brilliant.
I'll send you the headshot and the bio. All
Great.
right. Awesome.
Thanks
Well,
so much.
I hope you continue to stay safe and well. And
You too.
all goes great with the dissertation.
Thank you. See ya.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye now. Thank you.